ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः. So we will be continuing our discussion on the human mind, as you must have seen in the topic. So today we will discuss the three levels of the human mind. But before going into that, just let us recapitulate a little of what we had discussed in the previous two classes. So, in the first class, we had discussed these points, that the condition of the mind is all important in our lives. And what is the nature of the mind? That it is also matter. Actually, mind is unconscious, and therefore it is distinct from the Atman or the soul. And then we had discussed that Antakarana is another name given to the mind, that is, it is the internal instrument. It is the instrument through which we cognize and interact with the external world. Then we had seen that though it is unconscious, it reflects consciousness. It is very close to the soul. So, like the moon reflecting the consciousness of the sun, moon reflecting the light of the sun, the mind also reflects the consciousness of the Atman or the Supreme Self. And all that we do and think leaves an impression on the mind. This we will discuss in greater detail today. And self-discipline is the only way to train our mind. These were discussed in the first class. In the second talk, we had seen the four states or functions of the mind. Today we will discuss the three levels of the mind, and after this we will discuss the three constituents and five conditions, as you can see in the chart before you. So four states which we had discussed last time, you can see. First is the chitta or the mind stuff. Second is the manas, that is deliberation. Third is the buddhi or the determinative faculty. And fourth is the ahankara. So these are very important. Again and again in Vedanta we'll be coming across these terms. So we had seen that the internal organ or mind has four aspects. Manas is the cogitating or thinking faculty. Second is the buddhi or the will. It is also called the intellect. Third is the ahankar or the self-conscious egotism from aham. Aham means I. So when I say I am conscious of myself. So ahankara is this self-conscious egoism which is in us. And fourth is the chitta. The chitta is the substance in and through which all the faculties act. It is as if the floor of the mind or the sea in which various faculties are waves. This we had seen last time. So the chitta is like a lake, and all these buddhi, ahankara, all these are like waves in that one lake. So we had seen all these in detail. So here is the process of perception, as we had seen. it is before you. So Sankhya psychology says that in perception, for example, when we see something, there are, first of all, the instrument of vision, the eyes. So you can see above the external instrument, that is the eye. Behind the instrument, the eyes is the organ of vision or indriya. The optic nerve and its centers, which is not the external instrument, but without which the eyes will not see. But more still is needed for perception. The mind or manas must come and attach itself to the organ. So below you can see mind, intellect and egoism. So mind comes and attaches itself to the organ, and beside this, the sensation must be carried to the intellect or buddhi, which is the determinative reactive state of the mind. So when the reaction comes from buddhi, along with it flashes the external world and egoism. So, but still the picture is not complete. Now, just as every picture being composed of successive impulses of light must be united on something stationary, like in the digital method, I don't know, but when we used to see, when we were young, you used to see cinema in the cinema hall. So what used to happen, there used to be a big reel which they used to play in the background. Those reels used to contain small pictures. So that reel used to be rotated at a very fast rate so that we could see that the whole thing moving as if there is no gap. So all of these pictures were united on a huge screen which is placed in the movie theater. So all these sensations which are coming must be united on something stationary to form a whole. So similarly, all the ideas in the mind must be gathered and projected on something that is stationary, which does not change at all. And that is what is called the Purusha or the Atma. So all these things last time we have studied. Here you can see, we had seen that what is the Antakarana? Antakarana consists of the Indriya or organs, Manas or mind, Buddhi or determinative faculty, and Ahankar or egoism. So this is according to Sankhya, and Advaita Vedanta also adds Chitta to this. So according to Advaita Vedanta, Chitta is also a part of the Antakarana or the internal instrument. So just stop sharing the photos. So all these we have already discussed. So today what we will discuss is the 3 levels of the mind. We have already discussed the 4 functions. Now 3 levels, as most of you know, are the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, and the superconscious mind. These are the 3 levels. Conscious, which we are aware of, then the subconscious, which works underneath, and beyond this is the superconscious. So these are the 3 levels of the human mind. Now, conscious, we are more or less aware of what is going on in the mind every time. Superconscious, it will take us, most of us, it will take a long time before we reach that state. So we will discuss the 3 levels, but we will primarily focus on the subconscious mind. Subconscious mind, although we know that it is there, but we do not know the process we do not know in the way in which these impressions are stored in the subconscious mind. So, wonderful analysis by the Sankhya philosophers of these three levels of the mind, which we will study today. So, Vedanta studies the mind particularly as the seat of impressions. See, because it is the impressions or the sanskaras which make us what we are. All the things we are taking inside or thinking about, all these things leave an impression on the mind, and that makes us what we are. So that is the all important factor in our life. What kind of impressions to take in, what kind of impressions to foster, what kind of impressions to ignore, what kind of impressions to shun altogether. Actually, this is what is yoga. This is what is the whole science of spirituality is. That training the mind by taking hold or trying to get control over the impressions of the mind, and finally transcending all. Yoga in the Sankhya philosophy is that all the waves which arise in the mind due to these impressions have to be stopped completely to attain the state of yoga. So all the time, whenever we are doing anything, we are dealing with those impressions. That is why Vedanta lays great stress on the mind as the seat of impressions. That is where all the impressions come and they are stored. So these impressions are left on the mind not only by the perception of objects, but also through our activities. I see something, I see a chair. So my mind tries to find, first of all, is this object I see something similar to what I have seen? Then it searches the database and finds out, yeah, it is like a chair. So this is coming from outside. But whatever we do also leaves an impression on the mind. Suppose I do a good deed, then I will feel nice. There will be an impression of doing that good deed. Suppose I do something wrong, then I won't feel so nice because I feel that I have done something bad. So all these activities leave an impression. So we have seen that we have 5 organs of perception: hearing, seeing, taste, etc., smell, and we have also 5 organs of action like the hand, feet, etc. So just as the functions of the organs of cognition, that is eyes, ears, they leave some impression of them on the mind, so also the organs of action when we are doing something with the hand, with the legs, etc. So these impressions become the source of memory as well as the source of all our likes and dislikes. I eat today a nice chocolate or something. As soon as I put it in my mouth, the tongue tastes it, it tells the mind, oh, it is something very nice. So whenever somebody brings a chocolate, immediately we refer to our mind, oh, last time I had got the taste, I liked it. So let me have one more. But suppose we have taken something like oatmeal or something, we may not have liked that. So once again when it comes to us, immediately the mind revolts. Oh my God, because it remembers the taste. So all our likes and dislikes also come from these impressions. So when we see something, some impression is left on the mind, and from that impression we can create an image of that thing. When we speak or we hold something or you give something, You work with the hands, move with the legs. Any function that is done by these organs of actions leaves an impression on the mind. That is the thing. So our experiences and our activities are constantly leaving impressions on the mind. We cannot stop that. So the mind is a very big storehouse of all these impressions. And not a single impression is eliminated, mind you. It is all stored there. Like a hard disk we format in the computer, we cannot format the mind. We cannot press a switch and say, oh, let the impressions go. They won't go. You can't wipe them out. Once they enter, they are there to stay. So it's like a big, huge storehouse. Practically, it has infinite capacity. So we cannot forget even what we had done in our early life when we were young, or sometimes what happens, these impressions are stored so deep that we are not conscious of them. We say that we don't remember, but actually it is there. If we try through proper methods, maybe we can remember those also, what we had done when we were very young. So not a single impression is eliminated. That is the stress is on that. So even the impressions of which we are not conscious, some time or the other through right association, those impressions will come up. Suppose we see somebody after say 10 or 15 years. So suddenly we had interacted with him, maybe. He suddenly comes one day, we meet him in the street. We don't recognize him at first. Then he says, oh, don't you recognize me? We had been there in that year, so many years ago. Then we search our mind. Then suddenly it strikes, oh, now I remember you. So what happened? That impression was not on the conscious level. Then when we try to remember, the mind is as if it were churning of the mind. Then suddenly we locate that impression. Oh yes, it is the same person whom I had seen so many years before. So many years we had not met that person, but when we meet him, the association comes. And through that association, those very old impressions also come to the conscious level. So these impressions, as already said, are all important. These impressions create our disposition, our tendencies. They become the source of our memory, our likes and dislikes, everything. They are actually like subtle forces within us that give the result at the proper time. And it is these that determine our future births also. They create for us favorable or unfavorable circumstances also. Because it is because of these impressions as subtle forces that we reap the fruits of our actions sooner or later. So because of this, because they are so important, that is why Vedanta emphasizes the fact that the mind stores all these impressions. And what we are is the result of all these impressions on the mind. So these impressions do not always dwell on the surface of the mind. That is the thing. So Swami Vivekananda has explained this beautifully. He says that there is a still lake, calm and still lake. We throw a stone in that. What happens? As soon as the stone is thrown, there is a ripple created on the lake. So think of the lake as the chitta. That lake is the chitta of the mind. And the stone that is thrown is either an external stimulus or something that we do. So as soon as that is thrown in the lake, means as soon as that external stimulus comes to our mind, so that gives rise to a vritti in the mind. That vritti is the wave of the lake. So just as a stone, when thrown into a lake, creates a wave, similarly, any external stimulus or any action that we do creates a vritti in our chitta or the mind. Now what happens? After the stone is thrown, it does not remain on the surface of the lake. It goes down to the bottom. Similarly, whenever the vritti takes place, there will be a time when the vritti subsides. That thought wave will subside. It won't go, no thought will go on forever. Usual thoughts. So as soon as that vritti subsides, we may think that nothing is left, but that is not correct. Because just like the stone thrown in the lake does not vanish, but it goes deep down and stays, similarly, all these vrittis, even when they subside, they leave an impression on the mind. That impression is just like the stone which goes below, deep below. So whenever there is an external stimulus, whenever there is an action, whenever there is a thought, even when the thought subsides, the impression is left on the mind. And that impression, even if it is not always on the conscious plane, it is still very much present. It goes below to what we call the unconscious or subconscious level. This is the thing. So Swamiji explained this so beautifully in this example. So the thing is, we can see very little of our mind. All of our thoughts, ideas, feelings and memories are not always manifest on the surface of the mind. Suppose there is some emotion right now, or thought, or idea, or vision, but in a few minutes it goes. So that thought is gone. Where did it go? Although it disappears from the surface level, there is another level of the mind where these things go. We can call it lower level of the mind. That lower level is the subconscious mind. So we get impressions through all our volitional actions. And these impressions gravitate to the lower level and remain there. That is the thing. So these impressions lie within us, broadly speaking, in two different forms. Sometimes they are manifest, we are aware of them. Sometimes they are not manifest, we are not aware of them. So this we should remember, that Vedanta does not divide this conscious and subconscious in two watertight compartments. That no thought can go from the subconscious to the conscious. It is not that. What is in the subconscious now, next moment it can become the conscious. As soon as that vritti or impression actually, as soon as it rises on the surface of the mind, it will give rise to a vritti. So we will become aware of that. So it is not that there are two watertight compartments. No, not at all. What is unconscious now can be conscious tomorrow, or even an hour later. So those impressions that are unmanifest are actually on the subconscious level. And those impressions that become manifest are within the conscious level. So what is the definition? What is the conscious level? This is very important. The conscious level is the range within our ego consciousness. This we have to remember. That which comes within the view of this ego consciousness, that I know of this, I am aware of this, that is the conscious mind. And that which is outside this range or below the range of this ego consciousness is the subconscious or unconscious mind. So by extending the range of the ego consciousness, what is in the subconscious also can be brought to light. So as it is obvious that we are conscious of very small portion of the mind. So most of the unmanifest impressions lie dormant at the bottom of the mind. They affect neither the conscious, they don't affect the conscious mind or our behavior as long as they are dormant. Only when they become active, then we are influenced by them. So in the Vedantic view, this subconscious is the repository of both good and evil elements. It is not some horrible place where everything bad is stored or dreadful as abominable as described by Freud. Not at all. It cannot be said that only suppressed urges live in the subconscious mind. No, not at all. So the unconscious does not only contain dark forces, many spiritual and moral possibilities which is hidden within us may also be there in the unconscious mind. We never know what experiences we have had in all our previous lives. We don't know what actions we have performed in our previous births. It can't be all bad. It must have been good also, no? So all these good and bad mixture, it is there in the subconscious mind. That is the thing. And of course, according to Vedanta, there is also the superconscious state. So what we generally call subconscious is below the ego consciousness. So ego consciousness is here in the middle. What we call subconsciousness is below. And what we call super consciousness is beyond the range of ego consciousness. This we have to remember. So ego consciousness comes in the middle. What goes below is the subconscious mind. What goes beyond, when the mind goes beyond that level, it is the super conscious mind. So when there is actual spiritual experience, when the blessed day will dawn, when we will realize God, then we go beyond the range of this ego consciousness, or we overcome the barriers of the ego. That state is called Samadhi in Vedanta. Okay. That is what is called Samadhi. So there are two kinds of Samadhi, as maybe you know. So in the lower one, in the lower Samadhi, there is also a mental mode. Why I am telling this? Because those who you have read Vedanta a little will say that, oh Swami, in Samadhi we know that everything is wiped off, there is no mind, etc. So how can you say that Samadhi is also a super conscious state of the mind? Yes, it is correct that in the highest kind of Samadhi, we go beyond the mind also. So that state cannot be described at all. But in the lower type of Samadhi, we are still within the mind. There is a mental mode or vritti even then. Okay. So, and then it is called the superconscious state of the mind, because there also there is a mental mode, and that comes in contact with the object whom we know. That is God, what you can call it, God or higher self or whatever you like. So that is the superconscious or transcendental experience. And according to Sri Ramakrishna, it is the merging of the mind in God consciousness. So that is the superconscious state. But ordinarily, we are within the range of this ego consciousness. This is the thing. We cannot go beyond it even if we try until we reach the superconscious level through Samadhi. So, this is the conscious level of which we are aware, and the unmanifest impressions lie in the subconscious mind below the ego consciousness in three different forms. This is the main thing which we are not aware of, and the great philosophers of Sankhya make us aware of that. So these impressions which we are taking, which we are creating, all these impressions, they lie in the subconscious mind as well as in the conscious mind. Okay. So conscious mind, those impressions exist only in one form. We will discuss that later. Only in one form. But in the subconscious mind, these impressions exist in three forms. Three forms. So it is a very interesting study we will just take up now. What are those three forms? Those three forms are prasupta or dormant form, tanu or attenuated form, and vichinna or overpowered form. So it is a absolutely brilliant study. I will just share the image with you. One second. So here you can see the unmanifest impressions lie in the subconscious mind in three different forms. First is prasupta or dormant, second tanu attenuated, third vichinna or overpowered. And in the conscious mind, these impressions lie only in one form. It are present only in one form. That is the expanded form. Udara, you can see there. Expanded form. Expanded form means when they are absolutely active. Everything which is on the conscious mind is active. No, we are aware of that. It is giving rise to thought waves. We know, we remember. So it is active. So conscious mind, there is no problem. Everything exists in an active state. But in the subconscious, these impressions lie in three different forms which we will study now. So stop the sharing. So please remember this. There are three different forms: dormant, attenuated and overpowered. So what are these? We will just see now. So first is dormant. Swami Vivekananda says, beautifully describes it. What is dormant? We often hear the expression that we say that these babies are innocent. We say innocent as a baby. But in the baby, there may be the state of a demon or of a god, which will come out by degrees. As the baby will grow older, all those impressions will come out. So those impressions were very much there in the baby, but they were dormant. They were dormant in the baby. They were not yet active. So we will see in detail all these things. So now when Swamiji used to go to Sri Ramakrishna as a young student, so he was an unknown person absolutely, Narendranath Datta. And when he used to go, Thakur used to say that sometimes even in front of everybody, Thakur used to say that Keshav Chandra Sen, he was a very famous figure at that time. Throughout India, he was a very famous figure. He had gone and met Queen Elizabeth and all that. So Sri Ramakrishna used to say, through one power, Keshav has become so famous. And Naren has 18 such powers or something, some number he used to mention. Now, where were all those powers? So Swami Vivekananda used to tell Thakur, what are you telling? Oh, these people will think that you are mad. I am just an ordinary student. You are comparing me with this Keshav Chandra Sen and all that. So Thakur used to say, what can I do? Mother tells me. So where were all these powers in Swamiji? They were there, but they were dormant. They were dormant. They became active when the proper time came. Okay. So dormant impressions generally don't influence the conscious mind. They are still, their work is still to be done. Then the second thing, that is the Tanu form, is what we are aiming at. Tanu means attenuated. Attenuated by what? Attenuated means they become thin, their power reduces. That is by spiritual practices. So in the yogi or someone who's practicing spiritual disciplines, these impressions left by the past actions are in the Tanu form. Tanu form means attenuated form. They have become thin. They exist in a very fine state so that the yogi can control them and not allow them to become manifest. This is the second one. And third, we have seen that vichinna or overpowered. What does overpowered means? Overpowered means that sometimes one set of impressions is held down for a while by those that are stronger impressions. So suppose we are there, someone comes and pins us down to the ground. Or a spring. Spring is the best example. So there is a spring, you press it like this. So till you keep the pressure, the spring will remain compressed. As soon as you release the pressure, the spring goes back to its original state. So overpowered impressions are something like that spring under compression. Okay. Now spring will not compress itself. There has to be a force. So what is the force that overpowers those impressions? The force is a stronger impression. Because nothing else can overpower our mental modes. A mental mode can only be overpowered by a stronger mental mode. So suppose we are thinking of some person whom we don't like. So we are thinking and going about thinking and spoiling our day. So suddenly some old friend comes whom we love very much. So immediately when we see our friend, what happens? The feeling of love for our friends makes that feeling of dislike that thoughts of dislike makes it go away. Makes it go away means what? Those thoughts have become overpowered by the feeling of love. But they have not gone away. They are very much there. When that friend goes, and when we start thinking of the person whom we dislike, again we will make our life hell by thinking all those thoughts. So overpower means it is just a temporary thing, mind you. Nothing has gone. One impression has just gone into the background by the force of another more powerful impressions. That is the thing. So we have to understand the difference between the Tanu state and the overpowered state. All these we will see in detail. Today there won't be time. So, and the last state which we have seen is expanded state. Expanded state means what? Expanded state or the Udara state is what? When the sanskaras having helpful surroundings attain to a great activity, either as good or bad. So when these impressions are on the surface of the mind, within the range of our ego consciousness, when they are very much active, when we think that, oh, I will do this, I will do that, I should do this, I should not do that. So these impressions are all active then. That is the Udara state of the impressions. So we have to remember that all the thoughts which we have thought, which we are thinking and which we will think in future, everything leaves an impression on the mind. And these impressions lie in our mind in 4 forms. In one form, they are in the conscious mind, and they are in the subconscious mind in 3 forms. What are those 3 forms? The dormant state, the attenuated state or the state of becoming thin or less powerful, and the third state is the state of being overpowered. So overpowered means when some impression temporarily overpowers one set of impressions which are of a contrary nature. So love can overpower hatred, hatred can overpower love, like can overpower dislike. So in Tanu state, these impressions are consciously, they are weakened. So the difference between these two is very important. When we consciously try to think as we should, we think contrary to what we should not think. When we consciously do that, then we are actually practicing spiritual disciplines. Suppose a thought of hatred comes. Now, as soon as the thought of hatred comes, when a spiritual aspirant, when this happens in the mind of a spiritual aspirant, what will he do? As soon as that thought comes, he will tell himself, no, this thought is inimical to my spiritual progress. I should not hate anyone because God is present in every being. So let me try to bring consciously the thought of love. When he does this, when a spiritual aspirant does this and keeps on doing this as long as he lives, he is actually practicing a spiritual discipline. What is that spiritual discipline known as? That spiritual discipline in yoga, it is known as Pratipaksha Bhavana. So next class, when we discuss these four in greater detail, these three states in greater detail, so this term has to be remembered. Pratipaksha Bhavana. What is Pratipaksha Bhavana? When a yogi, a spiritual aspirant, when he consciously, if some thought appears which is inimical, which is against his spiritual progress, then what will a spiritual aspirant do? He will consciously, with full awareness, bring on a contrary thought. So that the thought which is against his spiritual progress becomes weak slowly. Say within these 10 days, suppose the thought of anger rises in my mind 10 times, suppose. So in ordinary man, what happens? This state of being overpowered, in an ordinary man, what happens? The state of anger comes, he is angry. If he can vent out his anger, he vents it out. If he cannot vent it out, he keeps on thinking about that. Till a more powerful thought overpowers that thought of anger. Okay. So there is a joke in this regard. A wife served her husband some food. So the husband started eating. The wife asked him, "How do you like this? How do you like today's meal?" The husband said, "Oh, it is terrible. I can hardly eat it. Horrible." Then the wife said in a serious mode after that, "I have cooked it." Then what happened? The man grew silent, eating slowly. Then he said, "Oh, I am slowly beginning to like it." That is what he said. So what happened here? What happened was nothing. That feeling of dislike, he suppressed it. You know why he suppressed it. I won't go into that. But it was still there. So there is a big difference in overpowered and tanu state. When when one set of impressions is overpowered without our conscious effort, then what happens? It goes below, but it is not weakened at all. An ordinary man, when he becomes angry, and naturally he cannot be angry all the time. Some impression will come and he will get rid of that anger. So what happens? That anger goes down, but that anger has not become less powerful. It is just below for the time being, that's all. As soon as that cause is removed, that more powerful impression is removed, that anger will come up again. But in the tanu state, what happens? A yogi consciously, he knows that anger is not good for me, and it will not do if I simply temporarily I just bring in some other thought. No, I have to consciously think of the opposite thought and not encourage anger at all. So what happens is, just as when we don't get food, when our body doesn't get food, what happens? The body becomes weak. So when the thought of anger doesn't get food, means when it is not encouraged by the yogi, as soon as it arises, he brings in an opposite thought. He starts doing japa, or he starts thinking of God. So what happens? that anger is not encouraged. And when it is not encouraged, it slowly becomes weak. So when the enemy becomes weak, it is easy to control it. What is the aim of the yogi? To control the impressions in his mind. Because without controlling it, he cannot stop it. A horse is, we are riding on a horse. The horse is taking us wherever it wants. We have no control over it, absolutely. So how can we stop it? It is impossible. But if it is a very weak horse, it has not had food for many days, then what is just we exert a little force, we can stop that. So what does the yogi do? The yogi, what he does is, all the undesirable impressions in the mind, which has been there for many births, he does not encourage them. He does not let them manifest themselves. So he deprives them of food, as it were. And when they are deprived like that, they become tanu, or they become thin. So slowly, when those impulses are not given any scope to manifest themselves, they become weaker and weaker and weaker. And when they become very weak, the yogi can easily control them. Then even when they start rising from the subconscious mind, he can immediately detect and simply squash them there itself, in their seed form itself. That is the thing. So we have to remember that in both the overpowered case and the tanu case, one set of impressions is being overpowered by another set of impressions. But the major difference is that in the overpowered state, that is being done unconsciously. When a yogi practices spiritual disciplines, he does it consciously and right at the beginning. As soon as that thought comes, he brings in a contrary thought. But in the overpowered state, what happens? That thought can continue till something more stronger comes up. That is the thing. So these are the three forms, and a little detailed discussion we can do of them in the next class for those who are fond of Sanskrit and all. So there are many commentaries on these Yoga Sutras. So one of the most famous commentaries is by Bhoja, that is called Bhoj Vritti. So we will just discuss a little about these in detail. I think you will find it interesting. And then we will go to the three constituents and the next one, that is the five conditions of the mind. So let's stop, and just for recapitulation, all that we think and do leaves an impression on the mind. These impressions exist in 4 states. In one state, they exist in the conscious mind, and in 3 states, they exist in the subconscious mind. So conscious mind, how do they exist? They are fully active. But in the subconscious mind, they can be dormant. Dormant means they are yet to become active. They are waiting for the proper time or the proper impulse. In the second state, they can remain overpowered by some stronger impression. And in the third state, they are consciously weakened. They are very weak. Why? They have consciously weakened by a spiritual aspirant. So see, we are just conscious of the ordinary conscious mind, we never know what is going on in the subconscious mind. So these yogis, to help us, they describe in such detail that these things are in your subconscious mind. They are still there. Don't think that they are gone. They are still existing in these three different levels. So learning about this, we can control these impressions much better, because the control of these impressions is nothing but control of the mind, and that is the goal of each spiritual aspirant. So let us stop here today, then we can have a small Hindi song. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ram Krishna Arpanastu.